Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about a book I just finished listening to, an audiobook, Tevye the Milkman, written by Sholem Aleichem, or that's his pen name. His real name was Solomon Rabinovich. So this is a book that I had just seen scrolling through the library app that I use to listen to most of my audiobooks, and I was on finding this book in that list that I discovered that one of my favorite movies of all time, probably my favorite, no, not probably, absolutely my favorite musical of all time, and probably my top 3 movies of all time, Fiddler on the Roof. It was then that I discovered that movie is actually based on a book. I knew that it had been a stage play and musical before they made the film adaptation back in the 70s, but I didn't know that back behind all of this stood this wonderful little book, Tevye the Milkman, or sometimes it's translated Tevye the Dairyman. So this is the book from which the well-loved play, musical, movie, all of that comes. And I think most of us are probably going to be familiar with those later works. And if you are, you will, I think, really enjoy the book that stands behind it. Having read now the book and been very much familiar with and loved the kind of later expressions of that, I think you'll find a lot of consistency. You know, sometimes you read the book version of something that you've seen before and it's just totally different. It has nothing in common. That's not really the case here. I think that like the film version, I would say, very much captures the spirit and some of the characters of the book. It has a lot of the same strengths. However, they're doing different things and they're not exactly the same. If I could kind of give an analogy, as I was kind of reading through this and thinking about the movie, I told my wife, I said, this seems to me like the relationship between Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy and Peter Jackson's film version. There's obvious differences. Peter Jackson does some things differently. He takes some liberties. Not everything is included. Some things are added. So there's differences, and yet it captures the spirit. It feels consistent with it, at least in my estimation. And I think that's true of this book as well. But whether you're familiar with and love the film or the play or the musicals or whatever, or if you've never seen them, I think Tevye the Milkman is a book that anyone can enjoy and profit from. So first off, just a little bit about the author, Sholem Aleichem. That again is his pen name. It's a Yiddish phrase that just means peace be with you or peace be upon you. And it was the name that Solomon Rabinovich took to himself as a writer. So he grew up in the 19th century, lived into the early part of the 20th century, born in what is now Ukraine. It was then part of the Russian Empire, kind of in central Ukraine. Grew up in a family that had a Jewish family, obviously, and a family that had some reputation and some kind of prestige, but his father had fallen on hard times, so he grew up in very reduced circumstances, kind of with a foot in both worlds, having a heritage and some connections that were more upper class and educated, but very much feeling the pressure of their financial situation and all of that. He ended up holding a couple of different government jobs, doing some writing, eventually ended up in the United States, in New York City, which is where he finally lived the end of his life. He's buried in New York City. There's a monument there from what I see online about this. And so he was someone who, by the end of his life, had achieved a high degree of fame. Many people referred to Sholem Aleichem as the Jewish Mark Twain. And apparently when Mark Twain heard someone say that, he said, "No, I am simply the American Sholem Aleichem." And the comparison is very apt. One of the things you'll find if you read Tevye the Milkman, for example, is that like Mark Twain, Sholem Aleichem is a very gifted humorist. His stories are very funny. Again, it's a lot like the Tevye characters in Fiddler on the Roof, if you've seen the movie or something. Very entertaining, very personable, and both of those authors are kind of masters of dialogue. They kind of capture characters really, really well. And so when you read Tevye the Milkman, what it's doing is giving you a series of stories told by Tevye. And in fact, they're told to Sholem Aleichem. So it's almost as if the author is meeting up with Tevye and Tevye is regaling him with his stories. So the kind of structure or shape of it is actually fairly simple. Every single chapter of the book is just a story that Tevye is telling to Sholem Aleichem. And that means all of the dialogue, all the descriptions, everything you're getting is mediated through the eyes and mind of the main character, Tevye. So that itself, from kind of a literary analysis perspective, opens up some really interesting things, because you don't actually get to meet anyone on their own terms. You're always meeting people, whether it's his wife, whether it's his kids, whether it's the characters he interacts with, or the men they marry. You're always getting Tevye's take on everything. So that's very, very interesting. But as the book begins, it begins by telling about Tevye himself, how he ended up becoming a dairyman and getting the cows that he would use to kind of start his business. And then most of the other stories are following the lives of his daughters. So the film version follows the life of the first 3 daughters. And if you've seen the film version, reading the books, there are some details changed, but it's largely the same stories. However, if you have only read the film version, what you'll miss is that it goes on to tell you about several of his other daughters and what happens to Tevye after his wife Golda dies and things like that. So the stories contain a lot that will be familiar and a lot that will be new. The writing is very funny, it's very witty, it's very clever, the dialogue is great. You have this great just kind of storytelling ability. Again, much like a Mark Twain, but with a Yiddish accent, if you can put it that way. However, something that really I was not fully braced for was just how powerful the book was going to be. It's not just light, fun, well-written, entertaining stuff, although at times it can, strike those notes. It's also deeply moving. Again, much like the film. This is part of why I love it. It's a funny movie. It's creative. It's interesting. But it's also very powerful. And the book, Tevye the Milkman, is even more moving, I would say, than the movie was. The account of his daughters, the account of his life, the loss and betrayal and hurt that he experiences are absolutely gripping. And I was able to listen to the audiobook version that was performed by Neville Jason, who was a British voice actor, and it's incredibly well done. There were numerous times, I am not someone who's quick to cry historically. There were numerous times where I was moved to tears listening to the story and listening to Neville Jason's performance of the story. So if you can get the audiobook version, try to find that. I think Audible has that version. But it was just a phenomenal book. And I didn't know this book existed. I had never heard of Sholem Aleichem before. And now I'm absolutely hooked. And I'm eager to find more of his writings, learn more about him, and read more from this wonderful, gifted author. So I would highly recommend you pick up a copy of Tevye the Dairyman by Sholem Aleichem.